Hello, 5th and 6th grade. We are moving on to a new chapter in social studies. We just finished chapter 8, where we were talking about the American Revolution and the colonists fighting for their freedom against the British. And so we have we have created the Declaration of Independence, we've created the Constitution, we've created new forms of government so that the officials in place will know how to run the country apart from the monarchy of England. So now we're going on to chapter 9, which is titled Expansion and Evangelism. So now that they're a free country, they can choose what religion looks like, what government looks like, and what does expansion look like. We have the 13 colonies right now, but the land goes much, much farther to the west. And so what does that look like in expanding? So we're going to be starting on chapter 9, 9.1 today. Pioneers push further west. The first 13 states of the United States were in the east, all near the Atlantic Ocean. As the years passed, the borders of our country moved farther and farther west. Although today we think of the West as California, Oregon, Washington, Alaska, and so forth, in the early 1800s, the West meant any land that was still frontier land. The West kept moving farther west as America continued to grow. Daniel Boone and the Wilderness Road. Farm boy and frontiersman. A pioneer is a person who does something first, preparing the way for others. Even before the American War for Independence, pioneers had started moving westward. The most famous pioneer of colonial times was Daniel Boone, 1734 to 1820. Daniel was born to a Quaker family in Pennsylvania, and when he was 10, he began working for his father on a farm some distance from home. Friendly Indians taught the boy how to survive in the woods. Daniel's father gave him a rifle when he was 12, and Daniel soon learned to be an excellent hunter. In 1750, Daniel's father moved the family to the wild frontiers in North Carolina. While his father and brother farmed, Daniel kept the family supplied with deer meat and other game. He also traded the animal skins for family supplies. Exploring Kentucky. At the age of 20, Daniel Boone joined the colonial army to fight in the French and Indian War. During the war, he heard tales about the wilderness of Kentucky that made him long to see that land. The next year, he married Rebecca, who became a courageous and uncomplaining pioneer wife. Daniel had not lost his longing to see Kentucky, however. In 1769, Daniel and some friends finally explored the area he had dreamed of visiting. When he returned home after 2 years, Daniel had many exciting stories to tell his wife and children. He hoped that one day he could move the family to Kentucky. The Wilderness Road. By 1775, Daniel Boone was asked to return to Kentucky to blaze a trail so that other pioneers could follow. Together with about 30 strong men, Daniel cleared a narrow path, the Wilderness Road, through the thick forests and over mountains through the Cumberland Gap. At first, the path was too narrow for wagons, so the pioneers had to walk or ride horses. Around the time the American War of Independence started in 1775, pioneers built a settlement in Kentucky called Boonesboro in honor of Daniel Boone. Daniel soon returned home and brought his family to live back in Kentucky. Later, after more and more settlers arrived in Kentucky, Boone and his family pushed farther west into unsettled Missouri. The Wilderness Road led many of the first pioneers west. For this reason, Daniel Boone has been called the pioneer of pioneers. With the passing years, Pioneer Wilderness and the Wilderness Road and thousands of wagons and families traveled over it. Pretty amazing. Settling the Northwest Territory. Northwest Ordinance. After the War for Independence, the United States gained the Northwest Territory. Someday, this large piece of land would make up the states of Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, and part of Minnesota. Because our government knew that many settlers would flock to the Northwest Territory, Congress passed laws that would bring order and government to the territory. One of the most important laws passed, the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, guaranteed the freedom which the states enjoyed would also be present in the territories. It guaranteed the freedom of religion, outlawed slavery, guaranteed fair treatment of American Indians, and provided for trial by jury for all citizens accused of a crime. In addition to the liberties and securities, the Northwest Ordinance also provided for government in the new territory. The ordinance stated that Congress would appoint a governor and judges to bring order to the territory until its population reached 5,000 free men of voting age. At that time, the territory could elect its own legislator and representatives to Congress. Perhaps the most important part of the Northwest Ordinance was the following promise: religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and at the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged. Finally, the Northwest Ordinance stated that when the population of an area reached 60,000, that area could become a state and enter the Union. The Northwest Ordinance would become the pattern for orderly settlement of the American West. Moving to Ohio. Some men moved their families into the Northwest Territory because they felt too crowded where they were. Others came for adventure and new way of living. Together, these families formed one courageous group of pioneers, helping our country grow. Ohio was the first region to be settled in the Northwest Territory. To reach Ohio from Pennsylvania, a family would first buy a covered wagon, which we did for the Oregon Trail, or sure you've seen in books. It's like a square or rectangle-shaped wagon with a big white covering over the top on metal loops. And so it's covered, and so they would be able to fit all of their goods and their family inside, and it was usually pulled by horses or mules or whatever else they had to pull them, oxen. So a family would first buy a covered wagon and load it with supplies they knew they could not get in Ohio: seeds for gardens, a plow, tools, nail, gun, iron kettles, cooking utensils, spinning wheels, and blankets. Spinning wheels not as in cars, but spinning wheels as in it's a big wheel on a pedestal that they would use to spin sheep's wool into yarn or thread, which would then be used to make cloth. They had to pack enough flour, salt, bacon, and other food to last them until they reached Pittsburgh. Because they needed their livestock for eggs, milk, and meat, the family might tie a crate of chickens on one side of the wagon and a crate of piglets on the other. Behind the wagon would walk a cow. Since they had little room for furniture, the pioneers would have to make their own homemade furniture when they reached Ohio. Most pioneers found room to pack the family Bible, though. With chickens cackling and piglets squealing, the wagon became creaking down the rocky road. In a few days, the family reached the city of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. In Pittsburgh, they sold their wagon and bought a flatboat, a long boat with a flat bottom, which they loaded with supplies from the wagon. Chickens, piglets, and even horses and cows were loaded onto the boat. The family also bought more food and supplies. On the water of the Ohio River, the flatboat could be even more dangerous than a covered wagon and had been along the bumpy roads and trails. Once the pioneers traveled west of Pittsburgh, they left the protection of forts and soldiers. So at this point, they're really going into uncharted territory, having no idea what they're going to face and knowing that they have no protection from the government from that point on. When the family reached their new home in Ohio, they carefully took apart their flatboat and used the lumber and nails to build a home. New states. As more Americans moved west, new states were added to original 13 states. Vermont, which already had quite a few residents before the War of Independence, became the 14th state in 1791. Kentucky in 1972 and Tennessee in 1792 and Tennessee in 1796 followed. The population of Ohio grew so quickly that she became our 17th state in 1803. New pioneers who wished to settle in the frontier of the Northwest Territory kept moving westward into Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin. As the years passed, more of our frontier became settled, and more states were formed. The Erie Canal. One way people later journeyed to Ohio and even farther west was by following the Erie Canal, the first major man-made canal in the United States. This canal connected Lake Erie with the Hudson River, a distance of 363 miles. The man whose foresight made the Erie Canal possible was Governor DeWitt Clinton of New York, one of the early leaders in the American Bible Society. Workers finished digging the 40-foot wide, 4-foot deep canal in 1825. Although the canal cost the state of New York over $7 million, it repaid the state in tolls within a few years and continued to earn more money. During the early days of operation, a boat would be pulled through a canal by mules. A tow line would be fastened to the boat and the mule walking along the shore. People on the boat used long poles to help push the boat through the canal and to keep it from bumping against the banks. The Erie Canal proved to be the wisest investment. It allowed farmers to ship agricultural products east and manufacturers to ship manufactured goods west in a much easier and faster way than it was possible over land. So if you think of a canal, like the Gloucester, where Gloucester High School is, that is actually a canal that connects the Annisquam River to the harbor. And so if you're thinking of the timing of this, this is a long time before steam engines and before gas-powered cars or tractors. And so this is a 363-mile-long canal dug by people. That's a lot of digging. 40 feet wide, 4 feet deep for 363 miles. So this was quite an undertaking, and $7 million in paying the workers, in shipping and buying supplies. Think of all the shovels it would have taken to do that. So this was a huge undertaking, but paid itself off very quickly as it became a much better way of shipping things west than having to do everything by covered wagon. And the Erie Canal is still in use today. If you can look on the computer and find a video showing the Erie Canal, it's really fascinating. It's obviously not flatboats pulled by mules anymore, but it's still there and still functional. New schools and school books. As the country grew, more and more schools were opened. Americans believed strongly that each child should learn to read the Bible for himself and should be educated for citizenship in the Republic. Before long, children throughout the country were attending school. The Blue-Backed Speller. One New England man who helped shape American education was Noah Webster. Heard that name before? A scholar from Connecticut who wrote the first major American dictionary. Webster became concerned that there were no good American textbooks for students to use. Most schools used books printed in English. To remedy the situation, Webster decided to write textbooks himself. His books not only taught the children to read, but also taught the children to do right, to be loyal Americans, and to love God and His Word. Written in 1783, Webster's most famous book was the American Spelling Book, nicknamed the Blue-Backed Speller, because of its blue cover. The Blue-Backed Speller has sold an estimated 100 million copies. Noah Webster's book had such a good influence on American children that someone said he taught thousands to read, but not one to sin. The McGuffey Readers. Between 1836 and 1857, William H. McGuffey, a Presbyterian minister from Pennsylvania and Ohio, also wrote a series of textbooks. The McGuffey Readers sold over 122 million copies. Some of the stories in this reader contained useful information about geography and science. Some taught valuable lessons about honesty, obedience, punctuality, kindness, and love of God and country, and others were simply filled with good fun. but all of them helped children to learn. Webster, McGuffey, and other textbook writers helped make America a great country by teaching children to think of others, to obey authority, to be good citizens, to fear God, and to serve Him by obeying His word. These principles were the foundation of American education. And so, as the years went on, as America became its own nation, education was really the foundation for building a society and a culture and a citizenship of respect and honoring God, and how to be a good citizen. And that all started with education, not just with the people who fought for their independence, but for the generation of their children and onward from there. Education is so important. And that's something that we, I think, take for granted here in the United States because we have it so freely. Where in other countries, we've talked about this with our Ts, there's a lot of countries where kids, especially girls, are not offered education. And they are to go to work for their family to make money. So we're really privileged here. And we can thank people like McGuffey and Webster for seeing the importance of educating children and for providing us with an educational structure that we get to enjoy today. One-room schoolhouses. Most students in the 1800s attended a one-room schoolhouse. They did not have separate classes. All of the boys sat together on one side of the classroom and all of the girls on the other side of the classroom. The teacher would call the students by groups to the front of the classroom to recite their lessons. First, she might help the fourth graders with their reading. Next, she might quiz a sixth grader on his spelling. After that, she might help the first graders with their phonics. The teacher always stayed busy, teaching students and making sure they behaved themselves. Most of the teachers were Christians, and all of them believed in being good examples of righteous living. Although the schoolhouse was small and simple, the children took pride in it and kept it clean. They helped with chores such as bringing in wood for the stove and carrying water from the well or stream. The schoolhouse had a few maps and globes, and of course, no video players, no computers, or other fancy machines. But still, the children learned because they had the right tools for learning, good textbooks, and a teacher who loved them and wanted to help them learn. If you've ever seen Anne of Green Gables, I know I grew up on that, that's a good example. It shows you what a one-room schoolhouse looked like. You have the youngest in the front, moving to the oldest in the back, girls on one side, boys on the other side, sitting in long benches with desks in front of them or a long table. And they had a chalkboard to use as they're writing, and they had their textbooks. And that was about it. So think about that compared to our classrooms today, or even your classroom at home that you're using right now. Very different. Questions to answer for today. First, identify the most famous pioneer of colonial times. 2, the state or part of states which would be formed into the Northwest Territory, so list those states. 3, the law Congress passed to provide government for the Northwest Territory. What is the name of that law? Think. How did a pioneer family prepare to move west? What routes may they take? What types of vehicles might they use for transportation? Make sure you're answering all of these in complete sentences and go back to the section on the Cumberland Gap and Ohio settlement. Number 5, how did the Erie Canal benefit farmers in the West and manufacturers in the East? Go back to the Erie Canal section and read up on that. If you have any questions, let me know. Go back. Remember, all the answers are in the chapter. Most of them are highlighted or italicized, so you can find your answers that way. And next time we'll start in on 9.2, which is revival and missions. So we'll talk a little bit about what Christianity looked like during this time period. Thank you, and I'll see you later.